Before I share this story, I need you to pause for a moment. What you are about to hear is not just about betrayal, but about secrets that can bury entire families and truths that refuse to stay hidden. If you believe silence should never win over justice, then let your voice matter here. Subscribe to this channel so these stories are never silenced again. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, and share this video so that others, too, will question the shadows around them. Your engagement keeps these voices alive. I leaned over the coffin with my chest tight, ready to whisper my last goodbye. But the moment my eyes met the face inside, everything inside me shattered. That man was not my father. His skin was too pale. The nose was sharper, the jawline unfamiliar. For a second, I thought my grief was blinding me, that perhaps the tears distorting my sight were playing tricks. But no, I knew the contours of my father's face like the lines of my own hands, and this man, lying stiff beneath polished wood, was a stranger. My knees weakened. I clutched the edge of the coffin, my breath trembling, when the priest leaned toward me and whispered, almost as if confessing a sin, "Your father was never buried here." The room spun. I could hear murmurs behind me, relatives whispering condolences, the sound of chairs creaking under weight, the faint organ music struggling to fill the silence. The smell of lilies was heavy, suffocating, mixing with the scent of varnish from the coffin. My mother sat a few steps away, her veil covering her eyes, but I swear I saw her fingers gripping her rosary tighter, as if she knew something I didn't. My sister Clara avoided my gaze. She had been the one to organize the funeral. She had been the one insisting we not open the coffin until the very last moment, claiming the body had been damaged in the hospital. Yet now, as the lid lay open, the truth screamed louder than any prayer. I staggered back, my voice shaking. This isn't him. This is not my father. The silence in the room broke. A cousin gasped, an aunt mumbled a prayer, and the priest lowered his head, his hands trembling over the Bible. My mother refused to look at me. She simply whispered, "Please, sit down. Do not make a scene." But how could I not? It was my father's farewell, and he was not even there. The memories of the last week replayed violently in my mind. The phone call from the hospital, the rush to the morgue, the quick signatures on endless papers. They told me it was a heart attack. They told me it was sudden. I had been too stunned to ask questions, too broken to demand proof. The hospital staff avoided my eyes, and Clara had stepped in with unusual decisiveness, saying she would handle everything. I trusted her. I trusted the family. And now, staring at the face of a dead stranger, I realized trust had been the biggest mistake of my life. I heard a child crying in the corner, the son of one of my cousins, his sobs strangely in tune with the storm in my chest. People began to whisper louder. Some came closer to look inside. And soon I wasn't the only one noticing the truth. "He looks different," one old neighbor muttered. Another added, "That's not Jose. No, that's not him." My father's name, floating in the air like a forbidden word, made my heart race. The priest closed the book in his hands and sighed, as if the weight of years of secrets was crushing him. He had served our family for decades, baptized me, buried grandparents, celebrated weddings. And now he stood there, pale and sweating, telling me that the man I loved, the man who raised me, was never laid in that coffin. I wanted to scream, to shake answers out of someone, but my voice was trapped in my throat. My mother finally stood up, her veil slipping, revealing eyes swollen from tears, but also from something else, fear. She approached me slowly, her rosary still clutched tight. Her words were soft, yet sharp as a knife. "This is not the place, not the time." Her warning wasn't for my pain. It was to keep a secret alive, a secret I had just torn open. The walls of the chapel seemed to close in on me. The candles flickered, their flames bending as if disturbed by the weight of lies. I felt sweat cold on my temples, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I remembered the last time I had spoken to my father, 2 weeks before, in the garden, while he trimmed the old lemon tree. He looked tired, but his eyes still carried warmth. He had promised we would talk soon, that there were things I needed to know. Not today, he had said, but soon, when the time is right. That time never came, or maybe it had, and it was stolen from me. I gripped the coffin again, staring at the lifeless face of the man inside. Who was he? Where did he come from? And above all, where was my father? The questions slammed into me one after the other, merciless. Around me, the whispers turned into arguments. Some wanted to close the coffin, to pretend nothing had happened. Others demanded answers. Clara finally stood, her voice sharp, commanding silence. We will discuss this later. For now, we must respect the ceremony. But her eyes betrayed her. They flickered with guilt, with something she could not hide. I felt my chest burn with a rage I didn't recognize. Years of obedience, of silence, of sacrifices I had made for this family. All of it boiled inside me like poison. My life had been shaped by duty, by loyalty, by trust in their words. I had given money, time, and dreams for them. I had worked endless shifts in factories, saving every coin, while they manipulated my choices, guided my steps. And now, in the very moment of loss, I discovered that even death was another lie. The priest finally stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, his voice trembling. You deserve to know the truth, but not here, not in front of everyone. His words only deepened the pit inside me. Because if my father wasn't here, then where was he? Was he even dead? Or had the truth been twisted into something much darker, much colder? As I looked into my mother's eyes, I realized I was standing on the edge of something bigger than grief. It was the edge of betrayal, of secrets woven for years. My father's coffin was empty of him, but full of the lies of my family. And in that suffocating chapel, surrounded by mourners who no longer knew what to believe, I swore to myself I would find out what happened, even if it meant tearing apart every bond, every memory, every fragile piece of the family I thought I knew. The night after the funeral, I couldn't sleep. The silence of my apartment felt heavier than the organ music that had haunted me hours before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stranger's face inside that coffin. His features burned into my memory like a cruel reminder that my father had been stolen from me twice, once in death, and once in the lie of his burial. The city outside was restless, cars rushing through the streets of Chicago, horns echoing, but none of it reached me. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee untouched, staring at the clock tick past midnight, and all I could think about was the years I had wasted trusting them. When I was 18, my father lost his job at the factory. It was 1998, and the whole city seemed to be crumbling under layoffs. I had dreams back then, foolish ones maybe, of studying architecture, of building something that would last longer than myself. But Clara came to me with tears in her eyes and told me we couldn't afford it. Papa needs your help. Mama is drowning with the bills. If you leave for college, what will happen to us? I believed her. I believed in family. So I dropped the acceptance letter into the trash and put on an apron at a diner downtown. Every night after long shifts, I'd come home with aching feet, handing over most of my tips to Mama, who would sigh with relief as if I had saved us from drowning. Papa never asked for it. He always seemed ashamed when I pressed money into his hands, but Clara made sure to remind me constantly, we wouldn't survive without you. Years bled into decades. While my friends climbed ladders, bought houses, married, I worked doubles at warehouses and call centers, sending paychecks home. My father's health began to falter. High blood pressure, diabetes, endless prescriptions. Each pill bottle cost more than I could spare, yet I always found a way. My own life became a shadow behind theirs. Birthdays passed with cheap cakes, my 20s dissolved into obligations, my 30s into sacrifices. I kept telling myself it was worth it, that one day when the weight was lighter, we would look back and smile at all we had survived. But as I sat in my kitchen that night after the funeral, the bitterness twisted inside me. Where had all that money gone? My father often lived modestly. He fixed the same old car for decades, wore patched shirts until they frayed. He never demanded luxuries. Yet Clara always insisted the bills were piling, the debts were growing. I had given up vacations, relationships, entire years of my youth. And now, realizing my father wasn't even the man we buried, I couldn't help but wonder if those sacrifices had fed a lie all along. I remembered one winter in particular, 2006. My father had been hospitalized for pneumonia, and the doctors said he would need weeks to recover. The hospital demanded thousands up front, and Clara came crying to me again. "Please, you're the only one who can save him." I pulled 2 jobs, working graveyard shifts at a printing press while still covering daytime at the store. My body nearly collapsed, but I managed to bring in the money. Yet years later, I overheard a conversation between Mama and Clara about an investment Clara had made in her husband's business during that same winter. When I asked about it, she brushed me off, saying it was just a small loan. My father never saw that money, and he never knew what I had done to keep him alive. The patterns were always the same. Clara weaving words around me like a net, Mama keeping her silence, and me, the obedient son, believing that duty meant love. But love shouldn't taste like manipulation. Love shouldn't drain a man until he has nothing left for himself. Sitting there that night, I realized that maybe my father had known the truth too. Maybe that was what he meant when he said there were things I needed to hear, but the time wasn't right. Maybe he had been trapped in the same web I was, bound by loyalty and secrets he couldn't break. The next morning, I went to the cemetery. The grave where my father's name was etched in stone looked peaceful, covered in flowers from mourners who believed they had said goodbye to him. I touched the cold marble with trembling fingers, and the rage inside me solidified. This stone was a monument to a lie. Beneath it lay the body of a stranger, while my father's fate was hidden behind the walls of my family's silence. I whispered his name, Jose, and promised him I would not stop until I uncovered where he truly was. When I returned to Mama's house later that day, Clara was already there. The living room smelled of incense, as if she was trying to cleanse the house of what had been revealed at the funeral. She sat straight-backed, her eyes sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mama avoided my eyes, folding napkins at the table as if that meaningless task could shield her from the storm. Clara spoke first. "We need to put yesterday behind us. People talk, but if we stay united, no one will dare question us." Her voice was firm, commanding, the same tone she had used my entire life when pushing me into sacrifice. I stared at her, something inside me snapping. "Tell me the truth. Where is Papa?" Her face froze, and for the first time in years I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Mama's rosary slipped from her hands, the beads scattering across the floor, a sound sharp as broken glass in the silence. Clara glanced at Mama, then back at me. "You don't want to know. Some truths are heavier than lies." But she was wrong. I needed to know. I had given them everything, my youth, my strength, my future. And if all of it had been built on manipulation, if my father's death itself was another deception, then I would tear through every layer until the truth stood naked in front of me. I walked out of that house with their silence clinging to me like smoke, but my resolve sharper than ever. The years of sacrifice had blinded me, chained me to their needs, but now those chains were breaking. And with every link that shattered, I grew more certain that the story of my father's death and his life was nothing like the one I had been told. 3 days after the funeral, Clara showed up at my apartment without warning. She never visited me there, never lowered herself to sit among my secondhand furniture and peeling walls. She always preferred Mama's house, where she could preside like a queen. But that afternoon she walked in uninvited, her perfume heavy, her coat too expensive for someone who had spent decades claiming poverty. She didn't sit right away. She stood by the window looking out over the parking lot, as if she owned even my view. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were cold and sharp. "We need your help again," she said. Just like that. No hesitation, no apology. I laughed, bitter and broken. "Again? After everything? After burying a stranger in Papa's grave, you still dare to ask me for anything?" Her expression didn't change. "This is bigger than you think. Bigger than us. If you love Mama, if you care about her survival, you'll do what I ask." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I remembered every year I had worked myself to exhaustion because of her pleas. Every lie wrapped in tears, every demand dressed as family loyalty. I clenched my fists, determined not to fall into her trap again. What is it this time? More money, another loan, another sacrifice you'll bury under excuses. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. It's about Papa, and it's about what he left behind. The air seemed to leave the room. My father. Even in death, or in disappearance, he was still the center of their schemes. I tried to steady my breath, but my chest tightened as she continued. Papa wasn't just who you thought he was, Clara said. He owed people, dangerous people, debts you can't imagine, and those people think the family should pay. They came to Mama already. They want money and they won't stop until they get it. Her words felt like a blade pressed against my throat. Debts? Dangerous people? My father, the quiet man who spent evenings pruning the garden, who fixed broken radios for neighbors, who never even carried a credit card. It didn't make sense. Unless, once again, they had been hiding the truth from me. I shook my head, refusing to believe. You're lying. He would never drag us into that. But Clara didn't flinch. She sat down finally, crossing her legs, her voice sharp as ice. You think you knew him, but you didn't. He kept secrets. Mama knows. I know. And now, we need you to cover what's left before it destroys all of us. The request hung heavy in the air. I remembered the years of drained savings, of skipped meals, of endless nights spent working while my own life slipped away. And now, even after discovering we had buried a stranger, they wanted me to step in once again, to clean up a mess that wasn't mine. It was the same cycle, except this time it smelled of something darker, something criminal. How much? I asked, though I hated myself for the question. Clara's lips curled. 50,000. Cash. The words hit me harder than any blow. 50,000. More than I had ever seen in one place. More than I could ever hope to save in years. My stomach churned. My hands trembled. She spoke as if it were a simple favor, as if I could pull it out of my pocket like spare change. I slammed my hand against the table, the sound echoing in the small room. Do you hear yourself? Do you even realize what you're asking? After everything, after stealing my years, after lying about Papa's death, you want me to risk my life for your secrets? Clara leaned back, unshaken. If you don't, Mama will pay the price. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to watch her suffer? It was the same weapon she had always used. Guilt. She knew I could never turn away from Mama, no matter how deep her silence had cut me. Mama had been complicit, but she was still my mother. The thought of her facing nameless men with dangerous debts was unbearable. Clara saw the hesitation in my eyes and pressed harder. You think you can walk away from this family, but you can't. You owe us, after everything we've done for you. You owe him. Her words cracked something inside me. Owe them? I had given everything, every ounce of my youth, every dream, every breath, and yet they dared to say I owed more. The rage burned hot in my chest and I wanted to throw her out, to cut every tie once and for all. But beneath that rage was fear. Fear that maybe she wasn't lying, that maybe the shadow hanging over us was real, and that if I refused, Mama would pay with more than silence. Clara stood, smoothing her coat. You have 2 weeks. Find the money, or Mama will find herself alone when they come. When she left, the apartment felt colder, emptier. I sat at the table, the words echoing in my skull. 50,000. A debt I never created. A truth I never asked for. And beneath it all, the image of my father's empty grave haunted me. Was this the reason he had disappeared? Was this the secret he had been too afraid to tell me? That his life had been entangled with something darker, something that would one day consume us all. I pressed my hands against my face, exhausted, trembling. For the first time in my life, I considered walking away, cutting ties, abandoning Mama, letting Clara face her own schemes. But then I remembered Papa's voice in the garden, that last day, when he said there were things I needed to know. He hadn't looked like a man tangled in debts. He had looked like a man burdened by something else, something hidden deeper. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't give Clara a cent, but I would uncover the truth myself. Even if it meant chasing shadows, even if it meant dragging every lie into the light, I would not let their manipulation bury me alive anymore. The night after Clara's ultimatum, I couldn't shake her words. $50,000. It was absurd, but the way she said it, with such certainty, made me believe that she wasn't inventing the threat. Or at least, not all of it. I lay awake in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying every moment of the funeral, every whisper, every nervous glance from Mama. And one memory refused to leave me. The way the priest had leaned toward me at the coffin and whispered that my father had never been buried there. Those words were the key. I knew it. The next morning, I went back to the parish. The chapel smelled faintly of wax and dust, the pews empty except for a few old women reciting prayers. Father Miguel was in his office, hunched over papers, but when he saw me, his face went pale as if he had been expecting this visit. I closed the door behind me and sat down. "You said something to me," I began, my voice low. "Something I can't forget. That my father was never buried in that coffin. What did you mean?" The priest rubbed his forehead, his hands trembling. For a moment I thought he would deny it, but instead he whispered, "I should have kept my mouth shut." I leaned forward. "Please, I deserve to know the truth. I gave my whole life to this family. Don't let me die without answers." He looked into my eyes, and I saw a war inside him. Finally, he spoke. "Your father's body was never delivered to us from the morgue. The coffin was sealed when it arrived. I asked Clara why, and she told me it was because of the condition of the remains. But I knew she was lying. Still, I couldn't prove it. And when the day of the funeral came, I saw the face inside. I had never seen that man before. The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. So it was true. Clara had arranged everything, had placed a stranger in that coffin, had orchestrated the whole charade. My father hadn't just disappeared. He had been erased. "Do you know why?" I asked. Father Miguel shook his head. "All I know is that your sister told me to trust her, that it was safer this way. She begged me not to ask questions, but I could see it in her eyes. Fear, not grief, not love, fear." I left the parish with my heart pounding, my fists clenched. Clara's story about debts might not have been a complete lie, but I sensed there was more. Something darker than money. The pieces didn't fit. Papa's modest life, his simple habits, his quiet evenings in the garden. None of that matched the image of a man who owed dangerous people $50,000. And if Clara was willing to fake a funeral, then what else had she hidden? That evening, I went to Mama's house again, determined to dig deeper. The house smelled of old wood and cooked beans, the same scent that had followed me since childhood. I went straight to Papa's room. Mama tried to stop me, her frail hands on my arm. "Please don't disturb his things." I shook her off gently. "I need to know who he really was." The room was almost untouched, as if frozen in time. The same quilt on the bed, the same crucifix on the wall. I opened drawers, flipped through old clothes. At first I found nothing, just shirts, letters, photographs yellowed with age. But then, at the back of his wardrobe, tucked inside a shoebox, I found a small leather notebook. The cover was worn, the pages brittle. Inside were notes written in my father's careful handwriting. Dates, names, numbers. One page caught my eye. March 12th, 2023. Meeting at the warehouse. Must not let Clara know. My blood froze. A meeting? A warehouse? And why keep it secret from Clara? As I flipped through the pages, I found more entries. Mentions of late-night phone calls, of envelopes delivered to unknown addresses, of men he described as the shadows. And then one entry that made my heart stop. April 3rd, 2023. If anything happens to me, the truth is not with them. Look for the keys. I sat on the bed, the notebook shaking in my hands. Keys. What keys? Where? The words were vague, but I knew they were a message, a warning. My father had anticipated something happening to him, and he had tried to leave me a trail. That night I confronted Mama. She sat in the kitchen, her eyes tired, her rosary beads clutched like a lifeline. I placed the notebook on the table. "You knew," I said softly. She didn't answer, just closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. "He wanted to protect you," she whispered. "Protect me from what?" I demanded. Her shoulders trembled, but she said nothing more. It was as if a wall of silence had been built inside her, a wall that no amount of pleading could break. I realized then that the truth wasn't just hidden, it was guarded. By Clara, by Mama, by the entire structure of lies that had kept me blind for decades. But my father had left me something, a clue that he trusted me to follow. I spent the next days searching his belongings, retracing his steps, looking for the keys he had mentioned. I went through the garage, the garden shed, even the old lemon tree he had cared for so lovingly. It was there, beneath its roots, that I found a small tin box, rusted and covered in dirt. Inside were 3 keys on a chain, one silver, one brass, one black, each marked with a single letter, W, A, and H. I held them in my palm, my heart racing. Warehouse, apartment, house. Or maybe something else entirely. Whatever they opened, I knew it was the path to the truth. And for the first time since the coffin had opened, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt purpose. I stared at the 3 keys on my palm until the metal warmed against my skin, as if heat could force them to confess. WAH. I tried to think like my father, with his quiet patience and stubborn logic. He had never been a man of riddles, but he understood symbols and routines. He woke at 6, trimmed the lemon tree at 7 on Sundays, paid bills on the 1st, folded receipts by month and clipped them with small binder clips he reused for years. If he had carved letters into keys, it was because he wanted me to follow them in order. W came first. Warehouse. The notebook had mentioned a meeting at a warehouse. March 12, 2023. Must not let Clara know. My hands trembled as I typed searches into my phone. There were 5 warehouses near our neighborhood, 2 abandoned by the river, 1 still active for a door manufacturer, and 2 listed only by old permits. I chose the closest by the river on West 46th Street. The sun was almost gone when I parked half a block away, the air sharp with the smell of damp concrete and gasoline from traffic crawling along the bridge. I pocketed the keys and walked the last meters with my heart pounding against my ribs like fingers on a locked door. The warehouse had a rusted chain on the main entrance, but a side door showed a small keyhole scarred by age. I tried the silver W key. It slid in with a soft bite and turned like it had been waiting for me. The hinge complained, and the smell of dust rolled out, thick and bitter, mixed with old oil and the faint sweetness of wood pallets. I stepped inside, phone flashlight cutting a thin blade of white across the darkness. My breath sounded too loud. Every step echoed in a hollow drum that made the space feel endless. There were rows of metal shelves, now almost empty, a few boxes, a shattered clipboard, a caved-in chair. Near the back, 2 office doors with fogged glass that still held the faded outline of numbers. I tried the first. It was stuck. The second opened. Inside, a metal desk waited like a witness who had not been called. On top sat a cheap lockbox, the kind you buy in a hardware store, painted black and scratched to dull gray. The W key did not fit. I ran my fingers along the underside of the desk and felt tape. A small envelope clung there. I peeled it off and slid a card out. My father's handwriting. 2 lines. "If you are here, you were meant to come alone. Do not trust Clara." Beneath the words, a sequence of numbers and letters that looked like a locker code. I laughed, a broken sound, because even in the dark, my father's voice sounded like patience. He had not abandoned me. He had left a path. The locker code looked like something from a storage facility. I searched again and found a storage site 6 blocks away near an old bus depot. It closed at 8. It was 7:20. I ran like a fool, lungs burning in the cold, keys cutting crescents into my palm. At the facility, the clerk glanced at me through the glass with the boredom of someone who had seen every kind of panic and did not care for any of it. I showed the code. He typed it without a word, then slid a plastic badge through the hole and pointed down the hall. Unit A11. My legs felt heavy and electric at the same time. The corridor smelled like metal and disinfectant, overhead lights flickering with a tired hum. The unit door was dented at knee height, as if someone had kicked it in anger years ago. The black key with the letter H did nothing here. The brass key with A slid in, smooth as if it had been used last week. The unit was small, barely big enough for a mattress and a stack of boxes. There was no mattress. There were 4 boxes, each labeled with a month and year: April 2023, May, June, July, no August. My throat tightened. I opened April. Inside were receipts, handwritten notes, and a prepaid phone sealed in plastic. The notes were meticulous. Names I did not recognize. A few addresses. One stood out. The same warehouse on West 46th. Meeting with S on the 12th. Bring envelope. Do not tell Clara. May held something worse. Photographs. My father in a cheap baseball cap, sitting in the back booth of a diner on 29th. A man across from him with a tattoo snaking over his wrist. Another photo in a different angle. A third shot from across the street through a window that reflected my father's small, careful posture. Attached with a paperclip was a sticky note that read simply, "The shadows follow both ways." I opened June with shaking hands. Inside, a copy of a police report, unfiled, with a case number crossed out. At the top, the words, "Witness Protection Inquiry." My vision blurred. My father had reached out to law enforcement. He had been scared enough to ask for protection. I had never imagined him as a man who would even walk into a police station to ask for directions. At the bottom of the report, a name I knew like a bad taste. Father Miguel. Not as the reporting officer. As a reference contact for identification of next of kin in case of emergency. My chest tightened with a hot anger and a cold gratitude at the same time. The priest had been more than the confessor of our sorrow. He had been a sentinel placed quietly at the edge of a storm. July was thin, a handwritten letter that started with my name and stopped after 5 sentences as if someone had entered the room. My boy, if you are reading this, I did not want this for you. I wanted to leave a clean trail and a clean name, but I have learned that there are debts that are not money and debts that are not ours. The rest of the page was blank, except for a smear of ink where the pen had dragged. Beneath the letter was a small flash drive taped to a card that said "Play only once." I did not have a computer with me. I slipped it into my pocket and closed the boxes with a care that felt like prayer. When I stepped out of the unit, a security camera blinked red in the corner. For the first time, I wondered if I had been alone. The corridor sounded different, a faint scuff like a shoe behind a door, the kind of sound that could be nothing or the start of something terrible. I forced myself to walk, not run. At the desk, the clerk pretended to read a magazine, eyes drilling holes into the same page without turning it. Outside, the night had deepened, air colder, the bridge lights smeared across the river like a line of patient fire. I crossed the street and sat in my car, hands locked around the wheel. I wanted to drive to Mama's house right then and tear the truth out of the walls. Instead, I drove to the only place where things still felt like they had boundaries. The parish. Father Miguel opened the rectory door in a sweater that had seen better winters. He looked at the badge still hanging from my neck and the dirt on my cuffs and stepped aside without a question. In his office, I set the boxes on the floor, then placed the letter and the flash drive on his desk. He read the first lines and closed his eyes as if pain had a shape. I asked him the question that had been eating me from the inside since the coffin opened. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head. "Not all of it. Your father asked if the church could hold a sealed envelope for him. He said it was sentimental. I believed him because I wanted to. He did not bring it. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe someone changed it for him." He plugged the flash drive into an old laptop. The screen flickered and then showed my father's face, close and unsteady, as if he had put the camera on a shelf and hit record quickly. He spoke softly, the way he did when I was a child and feverish. "If you are watching this, I did not manage to make it to where I was supposed to go. I did not owe money. I owed a silence. Years ago, I saw something at work, something that made men rich and made other men disappear. I kept quiet to protect you and your mother. When I could no longer keep quiet, I went to the police, but the man who took my statement was not who he said he was. I had to disappear before they made me disappear. If I trusted anyone, they would be in danger. That is why I did not tell you. I did not tell Clara because she cannot carry a secret without using it. He paused and reached for something off-screen. The camera shook. He returned with a small key on a string and held it up. House? Yes, but not ours. A safe house. He gave an address I did not know, a number on a street near the state line. He smiled then, a small, brave smile that I felt in the base of my throat. If you come, do not come alone. Bring faith, bring proof, and do not come at night. He leaned forward to stop the recording, and for a second I saw fear cross his eyes like a shadow of a bird across water. The video ended. The room stayed quiet except for the slow spin of the laptop fan. The priest looked at me as if it hurt to see my face. Your father was not a debtor. He was a witness. I wanted to throw the word away because it remade everything I thought I knew. It turned Clara's story into a weapon. It made Mama's silence look like protection rather than betrayal, or both at once. It recast the stranger in the coffin as a decoy, a body used to buy time. I drove to the address at dawn with Father Miguel in the passenger seat. The road out of the city wore frost like breath on a window. We did not talk much. He prayed under his breath in a rhythm I knew from every funeral I had ever attended. The house was small and set back from the road behind two maples that had lost their leaves early. The black H key fit the lock but did not turn. For a wild second, I thought I had misread everything. Then I saw the second keyhole hidden under a brass cover. The black key first, the silver W next, the brass A last. The door gave with a soft click, as if pleased. The smell hit me before the light did. Coffee gone cold, dust, soap, the faint ghost of lemon oil. Inside, a jacket hung on a chair. A cup with a ring of brown waited on the table. A small radio sat silent on the counter. In the bedroom, a bed was made so neatly I could have bounced a coin off the blanket. On the nightstand, a book lay open with a paper scrap as a bookmark. I picked it up and recognized my father's handwriting in the margin. Page 74. Save for him. The bathroom mirror held a single hair that looked like mine when I was 10 and still cut too short. The kitchen trash had a receipt for bread and milk dated 3 days before the funeral. The refrigerator hummed with a patient sound. On its door, a magnet held a photograph. Me at 12, holding a fishing rod, and my father laughing at something I had just said. The edges of the picture were worn from being touched. I stood in that small kitchen with the black key still warm in my hand, and felt the air change, as if a presence had reached the doorway before us. The priest's hand tightened on my shoulder. I turned. Breath stopped halfway to my lips. A floorboard creaked in the hall. A shadow moved with the quiet of someone who had learned how to let the house breathe for them. A voice came from the doorway, rough with sleep and years and the weight of staying hidden. My boy. The voice cracked through the air like lightning splitting the night sky. It wasn't an echo of memory. It wasn't a ghost. It was real, raw, trembling. I turned toward the hallway, and there he was, my father. His shoulders more hunched, his hair thinner and whiter than when I had last seen him trimming the lemon tree, but his eyes, those same dark eyes, carried the weight of every secret he had borne. For a moment I couldn't move. My legs froze as if the ground had turned to stone beneath me. I wanted to run to him, to embrace him, to let the years of grief and anger dissolve. But I also wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand why he had let me suffer, why he had let us bury a stranger while he hid in the shadows. The two urges collided inside me, tearing at my chest until I could barely breathe. He stepped into the kitchen slowly, like a man returning from exile. His clothes were simple, worn jeans and a flannel shirt with the elbows faded. He looked smaller, but his presence filled the room with a gravity no one else could command. Father Miguel bowed his head slightly, crossing himself, whispering words I couldn't catch. My father ignored the priest, his eyes locked on mine, shimmering with something I had never seen in him before. Shame. I told you there were things I needed to say when the time was right, he whispered. His voice was hoarse, like sandpaper dragged across wood. But the time never came. They didn't let it. I finally moved, slamming my palms on the table between us. You let us think you were dead. You let me stand over a coffin with a stranger inside. You let me give my life away for years while they fed me lies. Why? My words came out broken, half sob, half fury. His eyes dropped to the floor. Because the truth would have killed you too. The room went silent except for the humming refrigerator. Father Miguel finally spoke. Jose, you owe him the truth now. You can't hide anymore. My father sighed and sat at the table, gesturing for me to sit too. My legs shook as I lowered myself into the chair. His hands trembled as he reached for mine, rough, calloused palms that felt both familiar and foreign after so long. I didn't owe money, son. Clara lied because it was easier than telling you what I really carried, what I witnessed. He paused, swallowing hard, as if the memory itself burned. 20 years ago, at the factory, I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't just smuggling. It wasn't just corruption. It was people, men with power, trading lives like they were shipments. I kept silent. I thought silence would protect us. But silence only fed the shadows. They grew stronger, more dangerous. And when I finally broke and spoke to someone, it was the wrong man. A police officer working for them. From that moment, I was marked. My stomach churned. The years of sacrifice, the nights of exhaustion, the endless money I poured into the family. It hadn't been to save him from poverty. It had been to shield a secret that no one trusted me to know. But why fake your death? Why let me bury a stranger? My voice cracked. He leaned back, his gaze heavy. Because it was the only way to keep you alive. They needed to believe I was gone. If they thought you still had me, they'd come after you. Clara agreed to the plan, though she twisted it to her own ends. She thought she could use it, manipulate it, perhaps even profit from it. I let her handle the coffin, and that was my mistake. She made you her pawn, as she always has. I shook my head violently. You don't understand. She asked me for 50,000. She said men were after us. She used Mama, used me, like she always did. And I almost believed her again. He closed his eyes, pain etched in every line of his face. That's what I feared most. Not them, not the shadows. Clara. She was born with a hunger I could never tame. I tried to shield you from her, but I failed. Father Miguel spoke, his voice steady now. Jose, you cannot hide anymore. The truth has already surfaced. The coffin, the whispers, the doubts. If you don't stand and face it, your son will be swallowed by the same silence you carried. My father looked at me then, tears glistening in his eyes. I never wanted this life for you. I wanted you to be free. But I see now I chained you to lies instead. I am sorry. The words broke me. Sorry. 2 syllables trying to cover decades of pain. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I lost. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I worked myself to the bone while you hid. Sorry doesn't bury the stranger we put in your grave. He nodded, silent, accepting the weight of my fury. And in that silence, I saw something else. Resolve. A man who had run too long and was finally ready to stop. There is one more place, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. The safe house was temporary. The real evidence, the proof of everything I witnessed, is hidden here. He slid the paper across the table. An address. A storage facility hours away, across state lines. If we can get it, we can finally bring them down. But if we go together. No more lies. No more secrets. I stared at the paper, my chest heaving. The boy in me wanted to forgive him, to cling to him, to rebuild what was lost. The man in me wanted to walk away, to let him drown in the secrets he had chosen over me. But beneath both was something stronger. The hunger for truth. For once in my life, I would not be manipulated. I would choose. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. My voice was cold, steady. We go. But when this is over, you'll tell me everything. Every detail. Every lie. Every silence. I don't care if it burns this family to the ground. My father met my eyes, and for the first time I saw not shame, Not fear, but pride. Then maybe, he whispered, you'll be the one to finish what I couldn't. The dawn light spilled into the kitchen, washing the walls in pale gold. It felt like the start of something neither of us could turn back from. I drove east with the address folded in my pocket like a hot coal, while Father Miguel returned to the parish to prepare whatever testimony a priest prepares when truth stops being gentle. My father sat beside me, staring out at the gray ribbon of the interstate, his hands tight on his knees the way he used to grip the lawnmower handle in summer. We left Chicago at 5:40 a.m., the kind of hour that makes the city look innocent. Frost clung to the shoulders of the road, the sky the color of old tin, and the radio murmured traffic updates about a stalled semi near mile 117, as if the world were not breaking open in the passenger seat. The address led toward the Indiana line, then south on a county road where cornfields ran bare and the wind moved over them in visible waves. We did not talk at first. I counted mile markers. He traced cracks in the window with his eyes. By the time we passed a faded billboard promising fireworks all year, my jaw ached from clenching. At 8:22, we pulled into a small town that smelled like diesel and pancakes. There was a storage facility behind a diner called Dots, a row of metal mouths with roll-up doors painted the same defeated blue. The office had a bell that rang twice when we walked in. A woman in a quilted vest looked up from a ledger that still had pencil smudges, as if computers were a rumor here. My father slid an ID he should not have had across the counter and asked for unit H74. The woman typed on a terminal that blinked green like a patient heartbeat. She checked our faces for a long second, then produced a clipboard and a key fob. The door to the row clicked when we approached. Cold air gathered in the corridor like it had been saving itself. H74 was 3 doors from the end, with an oil stain like a map in front of it. I pressed the fob, and the lock chirped. The door rolled up with a corrugated sigh. Inside were 6 banker boxes, 2 plastic totes, and a metal suitcase with a dial. The smell was paper, dust, and the faint citrus of something my father used to clean his tools. He stood back as if approaching an altar, and then nodded to me. We opened the first box together. Invoices. Bills of lading from the factory dated between 2002 and 2007, with signatures I did not recognize, and weights that did not match the product listed. The second box held photographs, shipping containers, faces circled in red, a man with a scar along his jaw smoking in the shadow of a crane, another man in a suit shaking hands with someone whose face was blurred by motion. The third box was worse. Copies of internal memos from the factory ownership group referencing special consignments and expedited customs clears. At the bottom was a laminated badge for a logistics contractor with the name Cesar da Silva, and a photo of a younger man with a face I realized I knew from family barbecues. Clara's husband. My hands trembled so hard the plastic edges cut into my fingers. He had moved to the city in 2005, married Clara in 2007, always the quiet man who brought expensive wine but said little about where he worked. He had laughed with his mouth closed. He had played cards with my father and always lost by a little, like a man who believed generosity was camouflage. The dates aligned like teeth in a gear. He had been in the middle of it all. The fourth box held notebooks, not my father's careful script, but a messy block print that marched to the edges of the pages. Names, times, money amounts, locations that matched docks and highway mile markers, and then a list underlined twice titled settlements. 2 of the names on that list were men I remembered from the funeral as friends of the family who had hugged too long. Next to each name was a number and a note paid in full beside one and pending beside the other. The 5th box held a folded cotton cloth that hid a compact digital camera and 4 SD cards in small plastic sleeves labeled with months. My father's breath caught when he saw them. He had filmed, not just written. He had frozen proof that could not be argued away with guilt. The metal suitcase took both of us to lift. The dial turned to the numbers he handed me like a prayer. Inside were 3 stacks of sealed evidence bags, each with a yellow chain of custody sticker signed by a Detective R. Vaughn. My skin went cold. That was the man my father had reported to. On the corner of the top bag, the same signature had been overwritten by another hand with a black marker, initials CDS. The letters looked like a brand. It did not take me long to read them as Caesar's. He had controlled the evidence. He had used a policeman's name as a bridge, or the policeman had been his bridge. Either way, the river they crossed was ours. My father touched the bags as if they might burn. He said softly that he had stolen them back the night he left, that he had walked out with a plastic bin and the courage people never see until a quiet man decides he is done being quiet. He had come here because H74 was a combination of my birth month and the year he met my mother. He had believed the universe would humor that kind of faith one more time. It had, until now. I heard the sound before he did. A car door thudding against winter air. Another. Footsteps that were not curious but precise. I looked at my father and he nodded once. The nod that used to mean now when he passed me the ball in the yard. We closed the suitcase, sealed the boxes we could not carry, and lifted the metal case and the tote with the SD cards. The unit door rolled down with a swallow of stale air. We moved toward the far exit rather than the office. The corridor amplified the footsteps as if the building wanted to warn us. I could see the rectangle of daylight get brighter at the end like a promise. We made it 2 doors from freedom when a silhouette filled the opening. The man was average height, heavy jacket, a knit cap, a hand in his pocket. He smiled without warmth. He said my father's name like a greeting you give an old debt. Another shape appeared behind him, broader, hands free, eyes scanning. Panic tried to turn my knees to water. My father stepped forward, body between me and the men, and I saw the version of him that used to stand in front of me when the neighbor's dog broke its chain. He did not shake now. He said the man's name softly. S. The letter from the notebook. The one at the diner with the tattoo along his wrist. S told us the story we already knew, but needed to hear out loud to believe. That Caesar had taken over the factory's quiet operations after marrying my sister. That the badge was not a disguise, but a membership card. That the crooked officer had moved to a white-collar unit where files mattered more than bruises, and had learned how to file silence. That my father had seen a container opened that should not have been and had watched 2 men walk in and only one walk out. That the stranger we buried had likely been a body meant to terrify someone else. Redirected to our chapel when time ran short and lies ran long. S said Caesar used the funeral to confirm that the family would not look for a body that had never been ours. He said it with the dry voice of a man who had learned the cost of talking. He was not there to threaten us, he said. He was there to trade. He could deliver a slice of safety if we could hand him certainty. Names, dates, the chain we had just lifted out of a suitcase. He wanted copies. He wanted insurance. My father listened and then did something I did not expect. He asked S if he had a child. The man hesitated, then said, a boy, 7, who liked plastic dinosaurs and always lost his right Velcro shoe. My father said then that he would not leave that boy an heirloom of fear. That if S wanted copies, he could have them, but the originals were leaving town today and would land on the desk of someone whose badge still meant what the metal promised. For a second, I saw S's eyes change. I realized he was not our enemy. He was a man who had been orbiting the same gravity well and was trying to find a way off the curve. He told us not to go back to the interstate. He told us there would be a checkpoint at mile 117 because traffic reports are the best way to hide a net. He drew a map on the back of a receipt with a pen that had bled through 100 such decisions. He said to take County Road 9 to an old rail bridge where the boards rattled but held. He said a woman named Dot at the diner could lend us a back door and a minute if we used his name gently. He had made enemies in both directions. He did not want to make us one more. We walked out in the open with the suitcase between us. The air had warmed just enough to smell like wet pennies. In the diner, Dot looked at S's name written on the receipt, and then at my father's face, and decided to pretend we were cousins from Nebraska who overordered breakfast. She handed us a brown bag heavier than sandwiches and told us to get off her lot before her nephew came back from the restroom and started asking why we were pale. In the bag, I found a thermos of coffee, a first aid kit, and a prepaid phone with a number taped to it. The number was written in the same block print from the notebooks. Dot had figured out more than most. We took the county road. The fields opened like unrolled blueprints and the sky lifted. My father dozed for 10 minutes and woke with a jerk that made the suitcase rattle. He apologized and then smiled at the sound of himself apologizing. He told me he had kept a log of every penny I had given, and that money sat in accounts I did not know under my name. He said the totals would not give back time, but would give me a floor instead of a void when this ended. He said he could not promise what would happen next. I told him I had learned to live without promises, and that this was the first day I did not want to. The grove where the rail bridge used to carry freight smelled like creosote and river. Boards moaned under the tires, but the beams were solid. On the other side, my phone vibrated with a message from a number I did not recognize. A single line: "Do not go home. They are waiting." I stopped the car so fast the thermos slid and thunked. My father read the screen and closed his eyes as if calculating the shape of a new loss. If they were at Mama's house, then Clara had moved faster than I thought possible. Or she had never needed to move at all because she had always been at the center. We drove to the parish instead. Father Miguel met us in the side lot with a paper envelope that looked like it had slept under his pillow. Inside were copies he had made of the letter, the video, and the notebook pages he had scanned while we were gone. He had also printed a page from an email account that belonged to Clara. The subject line was donations for the memorial. The body contained a bank routing number that did not belong to any charity. It belonged to an LLC registered to my sister and Cesar 2 months before my father's supposed heart attack. They had built a funnel and called it grief. The priest said someone had been in the chapel asking about me an hour earlier. A man who wore cologne too expensive for a weekday and shoes that had never met salt. He told us to move quickly. He said the rectory had a back staircase no one remembered unless they had been an altar boy in the 80s. He said his car was behind the hedge with the engine already warm. He looked smaller and larger at once, a man who had finally reconciled faith with action. We climbed the stairs with the suitcase and the tote. My legs shook in a new way now, not with panic, but with the recognition that the next step would change not just my life, but the architecture of my family. When we reached the alley, a gust lifted leaves into a little cyclone that spun out and died. For a second, the world held still. Then a sedan turned into the mouth of the alley and stopped as if the driver had hit glass. The passenger window rolled down. Clara looked out with a face I had known since childhood and did not recognize at all. "Get in," she said. "We need to talk." "Get in," she said, her voice smooth, almost casual, as if we were children again and she was calling me inside for dinner. But there was nothing innocent in her eyes. They were sharp, calculating, glinting with the kind of cold certainty only someone who believes they hold every card can project. The sedan idled in the alley, exhaust curling like smoke from a gun still warm. Beside her in the driver's seat sat Cesar, his broad shoulders too still, his jaw set like stone. He didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes forward, as if all this was routine, as if betrayal were just another shift at the factory. I didn't move. My father gripped the handle of the suitcase tighter, and I could feel the tremor in his hand even though he tried to hide it. Father Miguel stood slightly behind us, whispering words under his breath, a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell. The alley seemed to shrink, the walls leaning in, the air colder. "After all this," I said, my voice shaking but louder than I expected, "you still have the audacity to show up here? After lying about Papa's death? After burying a stranger? After draining my life dry with your demands?" Clara smiled. It wasn't warmth. It was victory. "You don't understand. You never did. You always thought life was about sacrifice, about waiting for some reward that would never come. I made choices. I built something. You can either fight me and lose, or join me and survive." My chest tightened. Survive? On lies? On blood? She tilted her head, her tone condescending. On reality. Papa chose silence, and look where it got him. Hiding in rat holes, dragging you into danger, clinging to scraps of evidence that mean nothing without power to use them. I chose differently. I chose to stand beside men who actually run this city. Her hand gestured lazily toward Cesar, who still hadn't spoken, his eyes scanning the mirrors like a soldier on patrol. My father stepped forward then, his voice hoarse but steady. "Clara, You sold us. You sold your own family. She laughed, sharp and cruel. Family? Don't talk to me about family. You raised me on scraps, kept secrets from me, treated me like I was too weak to know the truth. Caesar offered me strength, a place at the table. Why should I have stayed small when I could rule? Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I had always seen her as manipulative, yes, but never imagined the hunger inside her was this vast, this consuming. She wasn't just a sister anymore. She was an enemy. Get in the car, she repeated. We'll talk properly. Maybe I'll even forgive you for stealing what doesn't belong to you. I glanced at the suitcase in my father's hand. The truth, the evidence, the weight of years. For the first time, I realized that this was what Clara wanted all along. Not Mama's protection, not my money, not even Papa's silence. She wanted the proof. She wanted to control it, to bury it, or to use it as leverage. I shook my head slowly. No, not this time. You've taken everything from me already. You won't take this. Her smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, and in that crack I saw the real Clara, the desperate girl terrified of being powerless. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold fury. She leaned back in her seat and whispered something to Caesar. He finally turned his head, his dark eyes locking on me. You should listen to her, he said, his voice low, gravelly. Men like me don't ask twice. The threat hung in the air like smoke. My father shifted his weight, stepping slightly in front of me, his body instinctively shielding mine as he had when I was a boy. But this time I didn't let him stand alone. I stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and raised my chin. You've built your empire on fear and manipulation, I said, my voice steadier now. But fear only works if we stay silent. And I'm done being silent. Clara's face twisted, her perfect mask slipping into rage. Then you've chosen your side. She nodded to Caesar, and the car door opened with a sharp metallic click. That moment stretched like eternity. The sound of a distant siren carried faintly on the wind. Father Miguel's whisper grew louder behind me, words of protection, his hand gripping the small cross around his neck. My father's breathing was shallow but determined, his knuckles white around the suitcase. And I felt a fire inside me I hadn't known was there. All my years of sacrifice, all the manipulation, all the silence, they had forged something I didn't recognize until now. Strength, resolve. And as Caesar stepped out of the car, I knew I would no longer be the pawn in their game. The alley had become a battleground, and the next move would decide not just our lives, but the legacy of truth itself. Caesar's boots struck the pavement with a rhythm too calm for the chaos he carried in his veins. He closed the car door softly, like a man confident no one would dare slam it against him. Clara stayed inside, her window rolled halfway down, cigarette smoke curling into the cold air. She didn't need to step out. She had already chosen her role, the queen giving orders while others dirtied their hands. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I didn't step back. For years I had let them push me, bend me, drain me. This time, I planted my feet as if the cracked concrete were roots holding me in place. Beside me, my father shifted the suitcase to his other hand, his body coiled like an old tree bent by storms, but still refusing to break. Caesar stopped 3 steps away, his shadow spilling over us. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing at me, then at the priest behind us. So this is what it comes down to? A tired old man, a boy who never learned when to shut his mouth, and a priest clinging to ghosts. You think you can carry evidence out of here like it's groceries? Father Miguel clutched his cross tighter, his voice steady now. It's not groceries, Caesar. It's justice. Something you've run from your whole life. Caesar's lip curled. Justice? Justice is whoever survives long enough to write the story. And believe me, Father, your chapter ends here. He reached inside his jacket, and I felt the world freeze. My breath caught. I expected the glint of metal, the cold certainty of a gun. Instead, he pulled out a phone. He raised it slowly, his thumb hovering over the screen. "One call," he said. "And trucks roll in. You won't leave this alley." For a heartbeat, I believed him. The years of his quiet menace, The way he had always stood behind Clara with silence as sharp as a knife. It was enough to make anyone doubt. But then I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not power, fear. A fear he was trying to smother with bravado. I stepped forward, my voice cutting the cold air. If you had that kind of power, you wouldn't be here yourself. You'd send others. You're bluffing. Clara's voice cut from the car window, shrill with fury. He's not bluffing. Don't test us. Hand it over now, and maybe we let you crawl away. My father's hand touched my arm, grounding me. He set the suitcase on the ground between us with deliberate slowness. His voice cracked but carried steel. Clara, listen to me. I know what you've built, what you think you're holding together, but it's built on sand. These papers, these videos, they'll bury more than just you. They'll bury the men you think protect you. Do you really believe they'll let you sit at the table once the walls collapse? You're disposable to them, just like me. For the first time, Clara's mask faltered. Her cigarette shook in her fingers, the ash dropping unnoticed. She glared at him, but there was something in her eyes. Hesitation, the tremor of doubt. Caesar snarled, stepping closer. Enough. Hand it over. He crouched, reaching for the suitcase handle. That was when my father moved. In one swift motion, he kicked the suitcase toward me and shoved me back. The case slid across the concrete, heavy and loud, landing at my feet. Caesar lunged forward, fury blazing, but my father blocked him, his aging body straining against the younger man's weight. The sound of their struggle echoed in the alley, fists striking, bones colliding. It was brutal, messy, and real. I grabbed the suitcase, heart racing, torn between running and staying. My legs screamed to flee, but my soul screamed louder. I couldn't abandon him. Not again. Not after everything. Father Miguel shouted prayers that tangled with curses, his voice breaking as he stepped forward, trying to separate them. Caesar shoved him aside, the priest stumbling but refusing to fall. Clara finally threw open her car door, heels clicking against the ground as she stormed toward us, her face twisted in rage. "You never learn," she screamed. "Everything you are, everything you have, belongs to me." Her hand reached into her coat, and this time it was no phone. It was cold metal glinting in the light. A gun small enough to hide but deadly enough to end everything. I froze, my body a wall of panic. The gun leveled at my father's chest. The world slowed, sound muffled. Every detail suddenly sharper. The smell of gasoline from the idling car. The echo of a train horn miles away. The way Clara's finger trembled on the trigger. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. She didn't. The gun fired. The sound split the air, louder than anything I'd ever heard, ripping through the alley, through my chest, through time itself. I saw my father stagger, his body folding as if the years had finally claimed him. He fell to his knees, clutching his side, blood blooming through his shirt like a terrible flower. "No!" The word tore from my throat, raw and useless. Caesar's eyes widened, shock flashing across his face. He hadn't expected her to pull the trigger. He reached toward her, maybe to stop her, maybe to claim the weapon, I couldn't tell. But in that split second, everything shifted. Father Miguel rushed forward, his hands grabbing Clara's wrist, the gun clattering to the pavement. The priest shouted words I couldn't understand, his face contorted with a fury I had never seen in him before. Clara fought back, screaming, clawing, but the weapon was already out of her reach. I dropped to my knees beside my father, pressing my hands against the wound, blood warm and sticky against my skin. His eyes met mine, still alive, still burning with something fierce. "Don't stop," he gasped. "Finish it. End this." Tears blurred my vision, but I nodded. I wouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. The suitcase was still at my feet, heavy with the weight of truth, the evidence that could dismantle Clara and Caesar's empire, that could finally bring light to the shadows that had devoured our lives. I clutched it, my father's blood on my hands, my heart hammering with rage and resolve. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about every year stolen from me, every lie fed to me, every sacrifice twisted into chains. And I knew then, the reckoning had come. The sound after the shot was not silence. It was the frantic rattle of my breath, and the wild drum of my heart, and the thin mechanical idle of the sedan that should have been turned off long ago. I pressed my hands harder against my father's side and felt hot blood pulse between my fingers, felt the sticky warmth become a grip that would not let go, and I told him to stay, to look at me, to count the seconds the way he used to count nails when we fixed the back fence. Father Miguel had Clara pinned against the hood, the gun kicked under the bumper out of reach, his voice a rasping litany that sounded like prayer and warning at once. Keezer stood suspended in a theater of shock with his hand half lifted, as if he still could choose a different scene, as if choices had not already chosen him. Somewhere 2 blocks away, a siren started small and grew larger, and in that climb, I found a thin rope of hope I could hold. I tore my scarf and wadded it beneath my palms, told my father to press, told him to steal air in shallow sips, told him to save the heavy breathing for later when it would be laughter. His eyes were glassy but fierce, a stubborn animal light refusing the dark. He whispered my name, and I told him not to waste words, that I would need every one of them when this was over. And he smiled at the corner of his mouth as if the smallest defiance could turn the world a degree toward mercy. When the patrol car slid into the alley, the officers spilled out fast and wide, and the field command in their voices snapped the scene into lines. Hands where I can see them. Step back. Weapon located. The priest lifted both hands without letting Clara go, then slowly released her and pointed to the bumper and to my father and to the suitcase, as if arranging the 3 points of a constellation necessary to read the night. They separated us, as procedure demands. They cuffed Caesar, whose calm returned like a mask, and they took the cigarette from Clara's shaking fingers and placed her hands behind her back while she spat words that sounded like a language built to hide guilt. An ambulance nose appeared at the far end, backing carefully, and men in navy stepped out with a stretcher that smelled of bleach and rubber. One of them knelt and peeled my hands away and slipped gauze and pressure, and a band that tightened until the bleeding slowed, and my father exhaled through his teeth in a long, controlled line that told me he was still in there, counting with me. They lifted him into the van, and I climbed in before anyone could decide I should not, because some laws are written in the body long before codes find them. At County General, they took him through bright doors, and I waited under a clock that moved a minute at a time in hard clicks. I had the suitcase chained to my wrist like a man in an old movie who knows the object matters more than he does. And the nurse behind the plexiglass asked if I wanted water, and I said yes, and then did not drink it. Father Miguel arrived with his collar straight, and the confession of a man who had not sinned, but had finally chosen action. He sat beside me and we said nothing for a while, which was its own kind of prayer. When the detective came, she wore a plain suit and a patience that did not look performative. She read the chain of custody stickers and frowned at the overwritten initials, and then looked at me the way a carpenter looks at a knot in wood and decides whether to plane around it or cut through. I told her everything. Dates, names, the fake funeral, the storage units, the SD cards, the video where my father held up the H key and said, "Do not come at night." I told her about the priest and about S with the tattoo along the wrist, and about the message that warned me not to go home. I did not tell her about despair. I did not need to. It had already written itself into the paperwork. They pulled a small room for viewing, and we watched the first card on a municipal laptop with a timestamp burned into the corner like a small sun. Containers opened at midnight. Men whose faces were names in the notebooks. A handshake at the dock office where the camera caught, in the reflection of a window. A badge number that did not match the officer assigned to that shift. The detective did not flinch or feign surprise. She took notes the way a surgeon makes incisions, clean and necessary. She said quietly that a federal unit would want this by evening. She said we were not safe for the moment, but we were less alone than we had been at dawn. By late afternoon, they told me my father was stable. The bullet had glanced along a rib and chewed muscle but had missed the deep machinery. The surgeon said he was lucky, and I said he was stubborn, and the surgeon smiled in a way that suggested the two were the same system wearing different masks. I stood at his bed and watched his chest rise under the white sheet, and felt again the small boy part of me that believed he could hold the world steady by holding a father's hand. He woke for a minute and asked about the suitcase, and I held up the chain and he relaxed back into a drugged sea as if a tide had turned in his favor at last. In the evening, the building changed temperature the way a room changes when a window is opened that no one sees. A federal agent with river gray hair asked us to step into a conference room and presented a quiet map of next steps. Protective custody for my father under a name he had once used when he wanted 3 warranties on a washing machine. Immediate warrants for 2 of the men in the photos and 1 for a detective whose badge had not matched. Sealed subpoenas for the factory ownership group. A separate file for the LLC that funneled donations in the weeks leading to the funeral. When he said the names, I felt them land like stones on a shelf that had been waiting for weight. He asked if I understood that cases do not move at the speed of pain. I told him my life had taught me that the long work matters more than the loud moment. He wrote my sentence down as if he might need it later when the room was less sure. Clara was arraigned the next morning on charges the assistant state's attorney recited like a grim poem. Assault with a deadly weapon. Fraud. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. There would be more once the evidence was cataloged and the accounts traced. She stood there in a pale suit that did not flatter under fluorescent light and stared through me like I was a TV screen with the sound off. When they asked for bail to be denied, she barked a laugh and then bit it back when the judge did not join the performance. Kezar's face in the other courtroom was a water glass that someone had just tapped with a spoon. Still but trembling at a frequency only instrument makers notice. His attorney asked for time. The judge nodded without romance. We moved my mother out of the house the day after. The lemon tree looked suddenly ancient, and I touched its bark and thought of my father's careful hands, and the way he pruned not to make it pretty, but to make it live. Mama had been a quiet moon in the orbit of larger planets for so long that light hurt her eyes at first. In my apartment, she sat at my small table and folded and unfolded a napkin until Father Miguel took her hands and told her in a low voice that forgiveness is not a pardon and that silence is not loyalty, and that she was allowed to rest now. She cried in a way I had never seen, not a keening public grief, but a private collapse. And when it passed, there was a new line to her back, as if a string had been cut that had pulled her down. The weeks that followed tasted like paper and hallway coffee and the mathematics of statements and the granular patience of depositions. I learned the grammar of evidence and the architecture of organized harm. I learned that an empire of lies looks unassailable from the street and ordinary from the loading dock. I learned that men who smile in photographs do not always know which camera is pointed at them. I learned I could sleep 4 hours and still find sentences in the morning. I visited my father every evening, and we talked about nothing big until we did. He told me about the notebook habit he had stolen from me when I was 12, and kept a list of comic books I could not afford. He told me he had saved almost every dollar I had given, moving it in ways that made it look spent, and that the total sat there waiting with my name on it like a door he should have opened years ago. He told me he was not asking for forgiveness, but he would not refuse it if it arrived slowly, rain on a dry field. I told him I would start with the weather and see what the season wanted. When the indictments landed in January, they made the evening news in a block that ran longer than sports. Names I had known my whole life scrolled under anchors who pronounced them with the care you give to streets you do not live on. There were handcuffs and boxes carried down steps, and 3 men who had not aged since the photographs in the second box discovered they could. The crooked detective's badge lay on a table inside a plastic bag, and for a long second, the camera stayed on it, and I thought how strange it is that metal can hold both honor and rot, and you cannot tell which by weight alone. Dot from the diner mailed me a postcard that said the coffee is still bad, but the sun on the storage doors looks kinder, and she drew a small dinosaur in green pen for S's boy. On the first warm Saturday of March, I took Mama to the cemetery and we stood at the stone that had pretended to be an ending. I placed my palm on the name and felt nothing mystical, only the cool, blunt honesty of carved rock. I told my father's empty grave that we would change the marker when the case closed, that we would plant a new lemon tree at the safe house in soil that had seen winter and believed in spring, that this time when we said goodbye it would be to the years that tried to own us, not to the man who had stepped back into the light. Mama whispered a prayer without looking down, and I realized she was no longer talking to the stone. I went home and sat at my kitchen table where the clock still ticked past midnight the way it had the night after the funeral, but the sound no longer accused. It marked time and let it pass, and did not demand I lose myself to either. I opened the notebook I had started the week everything broke, and wrote the 5 anchor points the story had given me so cleanly I could not mistake them. Years of sacrifice, manipulation that wears the face of love, a request no human should accept. The discovery that a lie can be bigger than death, the turn that reorders everything you think you are. Underneath, I added a 6th I had not expected to earn. The quiet work of making a future that refuses to look like the past. When I finally slept, I dreamed a simple scene. My father in the yard trimming the lemon tree, a measuring tape hanging from his pocket, the air bright with afternoon, a thermos on the step, the radio whispering a baseball game called by a voice too calm for the inning. I stepped into the frame, and he handed me the clippers without speech, and I took them without fear. And when the cut was clean, he nodded, and the tree seemed to understand we were keeping it alive, not making it small. I woke before sunset, and the city sounded ordinary, and the ordinary sounded like grace.